So we're in the middle of a series right now that's a little different for us as a church. We got this week and next week left in it, just so you know. So if you're newer here, this is we're having like an internally focused conversation. The center of my bullseye is somebody who calls Mosaic their home church. Okay, that's what I'm aiming for here. Now, if that's not you yet, if it's your first time here, welcome. If this is your first couple of times here and just kind of getting to know us and deciding. The big message I want you to hear from me is there's like no pressure here today at all for you. What you need to realize is, since this is kind of like a family discussion, I don't know, you kind of like imagine getting invited over to a friend's house and like their dad calls a family meeting. And here you are sitting in the living room, like, all right, like, this is weird, right? And it is. I just want to say that's a little awkward. Let's acknowledge it. But the cool part for you, as you're coming in here, you do get to kind of learn a little bit more about the family here. So you're going to get some inside stuff of like where we've been and where we're going. But I really don't want you to feel any kind of pressure, okay? If this is your first time here, still kind of figuring things out. If you call Mosaic home, I hope your ears are perking up. This is important for us, all right? So I want to start by reminding you of some of the miracles that Jesus did. Jesus did some absolutely crazy things when he was on this earth, and I just want to remind you of a couple of them. Do you remember when Jesus fed 5,000 people with a little boy's Lunchable? Do you remember that? It was crazy. And it wasn't just 5,000, right? That was 5,000 men, so we actually believe it was probably closer to like 20,000 people, and he took a couple of pieces of bread and a couple of fish, and he just hit copy and paste, right? Control C, Control V, and he just made that thing go, and what was not enough turned into more than enough. Remember that? That was crazy. Do you remember that one time when the disciples were, I'm acting like you were there. Like, remember when you were there? When the disciples were out on a boat and they were fishing and they didn't catch anything all night, and then Jesus like calls from the shore and says, cast your net on the other side, as if that would do anything at all. And they do it because it's not really about logic, it's more about obedience, and they throw their net on the other side, and all of a sudden, so many fish go into the net that they can't even pull it into the boat, and the boat almost starts to sink. Do you remember that? Crazy. Jesus is like a fish whisperer, right? He can do anything. Remember that time where he was at a wedding and they ran out of wine and he turned water into wine? He just rearranged molecules at will. And Jesus could just do stuff like that, right? You walk around Jesus with your Stanley, you don't know, every sip is an adventure, right? He could just, I guess we're starting the party right now. Here's one that's a little more obscure. Do you remember that one time where they were walking through and they had to pay a tax, but they didn't have any money, so Jesus told Peter, hey, go fishing, and the first fish you catch is going to have a gold coin in it? And he did, and like it happened, and he opened up the fish's mouth, and it was a gold coin, and he was able to pay the tax. Remember that? It's nuts. Jesus just had the ability to just do stuff like that. And let's keep in mind, those are like, if I may, the ones I just listed, those are kind of the B-level miracles, right? I'm not even talking about controlling the weather or healing blind eyes and lame legs or bringing people back from the dead. Like, these are just the low-level ones, and they're crazy, crazy miraculous. Jesus could do whatever he wanted. Total control. Create food, rearrange molecules, gold coins in fish's mouth, like whatever he wanted. All right, keep that in mind. Keep that in mind. Let's read a couple verses here. Luke chapter 8. Starting verse 1. But soon afterward, Jesus began a tour of the nearby towns and villages, preaching and announcing the good news about the kingdom of God. He took his 12 disciples with him. So here we see Jesus is going around preaching and ministering to people. He's helping people. They're going from town to town. Basically, what Jesus is doing here, he's doing church stuff before he's even established a church, right? He's going from town to town, and they're doing church. They're doing ministry. It's him, and he's got his guys with him, and they're ministering to people. He's teaching people stuff. People are coming to believe in him. All that's happening, and they're kind of on a tour doing that. But the disciples are not the only people with him. Look at verse 2. Along with some of the women who had been cured of evil spirits and diseases. Among them were Mary Magdalene, from whom he had cast out 7 demons. So it's a little spectacular, but basically what that is saying is that there are some people with him who had been impacted by his ministry. So he didn't just have his disciples with him, other people who Jesus had healed or Jesus had converted, and people who started to believe in him, they're with him as well. The people whose lives had changed and hearts had changed, they're with him as well. And in verse 3, the list continues. Joanna, the wife of Chuza, if you want a baby name, that's a good one. And then that's Herod's business manager, and Susanna. And then look at this last part. And many others who were contributing from their own resources to support Jesus and his disciples. Wait, what? What were they doing? Contributing from their own resources to support Jesus. That's a weird word to use when you're talking about Jesus, to support Jesus? And in case you're like, what does that mean? They were giving money to support the cause that Jesus is on, because they're going from town to town and they're giving money to support Jesus. And that's weird. Remember 5 seconds ago? Do you remember 5 seconds ago I was talking about when I was saying Jesus could do all those things? Jesus could make food. He could transform water into wine. Like, you go to a restaurant, you order water, and Jesus takes care of it, right? Like, you don't have to do anything. He can make coins appear in fish's mouth. He can make fish just go into your net. Like, Jesus can do all that stuff. But here we have a group of people who are giving money to help Jesus spread the gospel. That's weird. And because, let's acknowledge, spreading the gospel costs money, right? If they're going from town to town, everywhere they go, they have to buy food. They have to take an Uber camel to get where they want to go, right? They have to stay in an inn, the thing that was full the night Jesus was born. They have to go around. They have to do those things, and it costs money to do the thing that Jesus was doing. It costs money to spread the gospel. It costs money to minister to people. It costs money to do the church thing that he was doing. And the way Jesus is setting it up here, we see, is that he's having the people who were impacted by his ministry, the people who were a part of his ministry, financially support his ministry. That's how Jesus is setting it up here. Now this begs a question. Why? Why would he do it that way? Why would he do that when he seemingly doesn't need it? He can speak needs out of existence at will, right? He could just be done with the need immediately. Why set it up this way? I want to establish really quick here. I know what the answer is not. The answer is not that he has some lack. The answer is not that he has some need. It's not that Jesus is desperate. It's not that Jesus is like, I don't know what we're going to do for food tonight, boys. No, that can't be the answer, right? That can't be the answer. He can create food. He can create money anytime he wants. This is a choice. It's not out of necessity. He's doing it on purpose, right? It's not like he doesn't have options. Jesus is choosing to allow the people who are impacted by his ministry, the people who are following him, financially support him. He's choosing that. Again, why? This question, why would he do it this way? This is really important, really important. Not just to them 2,000 years ago, it's important to us now. It's important to us right now. Especially important if you are a follower of Jesus and you have like hang-ups about the church and money. Can we be honest? This is kind of a normal thing, right? If the church and money is a touchy subject, this question really matters. If you don't like that the church asks for money, this is really important. If you don't understand why the churches are set up the way they are, this is really important. Why did Jesus do it this way? Because here we sit 2,000 years later, and we're in like the same situation, right? Back then they had Jesus who could absolutely do anything he wanted to do, and they still financially supported him. And now we sit 2,000 years later, and we established last week, God owns everything, right? God can do anything. God doesn't need our money, and yet we're still operating the same way. The way churches work is the people that are a part of them, people who have been impacted by the church, are the ones who financially support the church. We have the same thing going on. It would be really easy for us to go, well, if God wants the church to have money, then God can just give the church money, right? Can't he just like do that thing? And I would say, yeah, man, wouldn't it be cool if Pastor Chris could open up her bank account on Monday morning and like, boom, 7 figures. What do you guys want to do? Who do you want to minister? Like, what do we want? Like, that would be awesome. And he could. He could have done it then, and he could do it now. So the question is, why? Why does he set it up this way? Because you could definitely be sitting there, and maybe this is more of a personal thing for you, like, why do I have to give my money to build God's church when God could just do it? Well, excellent question. Now, but we do have to acknowledge that question if you ask it exactly that way. Like, built into that question is a wrong assumption, right? Because if you were here last week, we established that God owns everything. So when you say, why do I have to give my money? Well, actually, it's not yours, right? It's God's money. God's not asking you for your money. He's asking for his money. So built into the question is actually a little bit of a wrong assumption. But the question remains, even if you ask it, like, it doesn't matter that you asked it wrong, it's still a good question. Like, why do I have to give when God doesn't need it? Well, the answer goes back to the verse we ended with last week, Matthew 6:21. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. So what if the reason Jesus did it this way, again, not because he needed it then and not because he needed it now, what if it's not a money thing, it's a heart thing? When Jesus allowed a group of people to support him financially, he wasn't accepting their money. He was inviting their hearts into what he was doing. It was an invitation to them. And what if that's the same thing now? It's not about money. What if it's about your heart? What if this is an invitation to you to be a part of what he's doing on this earth? And what I really want you to see is that if all this is true, then Jesus doesn't want something from you. He doesn't need it. He wants something for you, right? Jesus is not up in heaven going, I don't know what we're going to do about Wadsworth. There's no money there. And we're like, what are we going to do? He doesn't have a whiteboard out trying to figure that out. He doesn't need anything. So he's not asking for something from you. He's wanting to do something for you. Because we see in this verse that where your treasure is, there your heart is, that your heart and your money are connected in some way. And we might not understand it, but we can definitely see that it's true that money and heart are intertwined. That when your heart tries to move and your money doesn't move, that doesn't work. Your money and your heart are attached. And that when there is a financial commitment to something, there's a healthy ownership and passion that come with it. And we have to acknowledge that if no money is going towards building God's kingdom, then what does that say about your heart? Won't your heart have a hard time being all the way in it? Jesus built his church to work this way. I kind of want to say, hey, don't be mad at me. It was his idea, right? Heart, money, kingdom, mission, all that wrapped into one. So I'm not trying to be mean, but if you're sitting there like, well, I don't like that churches need money. I don't like churches ask people for money. I'm like, dude, Karen, I didn't decide we'll refer you to the manager. His name is Jesus. Take it up with him, man. I mean, legit, if you're a Jesus follower, I just want to say you got to pray about that. You got to talk to Jesus about that, because I'm just following this pattern of that if Jesus asks his followers to support him financially, like, well, I'm not better than him. Like, if he did it, that's the way we're going to do it. I'll be honest, I'm with you a little bit. If you're asking that question, I'm with you. I would actually, sometimes I do wish he'd just do it himself. I do wish that I could sit down on Monday morning and be like, what do you do, Chris? Tell me the number we got to work with this week. I'd be awesome if God just like, boom, there you go. But he doesn't. He seems to stubbornly want to work through us. So here's what I'm hoping for right now, where I'm hoping you're at as you're sitting here in this moment. If you're a Christian, specifically, I know you might be able to call Mosaic home and maybe you're not there yet, but like, hey, if you are a Christian, if you're a follower of Jesus, if you have put your faith and trust in Jesus, you believe in him and he's the thing that saves you from your sins, if that's you, I'm hoping that you see the wisdom in what he did here. That, being a follower of Jesus, you're saying, all right, this is the way he chose to set it up. I'm hoping you see the wisdom in that and how it actually is more about your heart than it is your money. I'm also hoping, I'll be honest, I'm hoping that you personally feel some kind of pull towards giving towards his kingdom. I hope you have that a little bit of a tug there. And not out of guilt, not out of condemnation, but because you want to be a part of what he's doing. And I'm hoping that you want to be a part of what he's doing. That like the mission, the call, the building of the kingdom, the putting a hole in the gates of hell, that you want to be a part of that. And you want to be a part of that financially as well. Again, not just because of the money, but because of the heart thing. And I'm hoping that this somewhat answered the question of why churches ask for money, because we do it because Jesus set it up this way. So I'm hoping that's where you're at right now. I'm hoping I got there in 10 minutes. It might be a pretty tall ask. If you still have some hang-ups, I get it. We'll address some of that here as we go, but I'm going to assume that that's where you're at. If you call Mosaic home and you're a follower of Jesus, you're like, all right, I see it. And if you do, then the next logical question you would ask would be, okay, if Jesus designed the church to work this way and we're just kind of doing the thing that Jesus did, then all right, what's my part in that? What does my giving look like? What am I supposed to do? Or you could ask very bluntly like, all right, well, how much am I supposed to give if that's the case? Good questions, good questions. Before I answer, though, can I tell you a Barton family story? So I have 4 kids, 2 teenagers and 2 kids. And we have a pretty hectic weeknight sometimes, so everybody's coming from different places. When we all kind of get home and everybody's kind of settled into the house for the night, sometimes one of my kids will ask me or my wife a question. And just to let you know, like, the moment they ask the question, me and my wife just get enraged. It's immediate anger, immediate fury. I don't think anger even covers it. We are so angry the moment they ask it. My wife refuses to answer this question now. She will never tell them the answer to the question, ever. Like, it's straight up. She will make stuff up. She will get angry with it. Like, all kinds of stuff happens. The only thing that doesn't happen is we don't answer the question. Now, when I tell you the question, you're like, really? What's wrong with you guys? Well, you don't have kids if you're thinking that, once you hear it. But I'll say the question in a normal human voice first, and then I'll explain a little bit more. So here's the question. Again, totally innocent. What's for dinner? That's normal. You might be saying, really? You get mad about that? I mean, I get it, right? That seems like an innocent question. I've asked it before. You've asked it before. This is a normal human question. Now, let me ask it the way they ask it, though. Hold on. What's for dinner? Immediate anger. Just. And here's the thing. You might say, like, okay, they're whiny. No. Here's the problem. You're like, that's just a question. It's not. It's not a question. If you're a parent, you know this. That's a pre-complaint, right? That is a prelude to whining. That is a I'm about to pick a fight. This is my opening statement kind of a thing. And like, it's never gone well. We've been asked it hundreds of times, and every time it turns into a thing. So my wife never answers now. She's like, go, we're going to eat some grass. Go pick it. Like, we don't answer the question anymore. Because what follows, I don't know if you have kids, you totally get this. Like, they ask it, and we've been dumb enough to be like, oh, we're having chicken, or we're having hamburgers. Again? Like, but yeah, I would eat the same thing every day. Like, I don't get bored of good food, but they're like, I don't like that. Can we make butter noodles too? Like, yeah, we'll just make that a part of every meal now, because that's just what we're doing now. But I guess what I want you to see is they don't ask because they want to know. They ask because they're preparing themselves for a fight, right? They're kind of, it's the first brick in a wall that they're trying to build. And I guess what I'm saying is, you can ask a question and have the wrong posture, right? You can ask it, and you could totally be like, it was just a question. But like, you can ask a question, you can have the wrong posture. So if you turn to God right now and you ask the question, how much should I give? What's your posture? How much should I give? I don't you do that. Don't do that. Because you know why me and my wife get so mad? I mean, besides the fact that we've answered it 100 times and it always turns into a fight. Part of the reason I get mad is because I'm like, I bought the food. All of it. We picked it up, we put it away, we stored it for them, and now we're making the food. They have to do literally nothing. They're just there. They just have to get a plate, put it on their plate, and then put it into their mouth. This is the whole job right here. And they have the gall to complain about the things that are being given to them. They've done nothing to receive it, and they want to complain about it. And that just drives me crazy. So let me just say, if you're a Christian and you want God to be a part of your finances, and listen, of course you do. That like, I kind of want to dare you if you're a Christian, like, I don't want God to be a part of my finances. Okay, go ahead. Like, that seems like a poor choice on your part. But my guess is you wouldn't say that. And you probably are somewhat aware, based off of some of your prayers, that you do want God involved in your finances. Like, you do. You want him there. You ask him for stuff, you want him to provide, you want him to open some doors, you want him as a part of your finances, you do. So I would say if you want God to be a part of your finances and you're asking this question, I would be real careful with my attitude about this question. This would be a question that I want to ask with humility and inquisitive. hey God, what should my giving look like? Hey God, how much should I give? What does this look like? Careful with your posture. So I want to answer it. I don't want to pull my wife. I'm not answering. I'll try to answer. So we're going to look at some verses. We saw that Jesus set this up this way, and then now we're going to jump ahead to the Apostle Paul sets up churches all over the world, and he has a way. He's trying to take the way that Jesus set it up, and he's trying to put it into some churches, and he has some verses here that kind of can give us some principles of what our giving could look like. So 1 Corinthians chapter 16 is where we'll start, verses 1 and 2. Here's what Paul says. Now regarding your question about the money being collected for God's people in Jerusalem, you should follow the same procedure I gave to the churches in Galatia. See, he's trying to set it up all the same way. On the first day of each week, you should put aside a portion of the money you have earned. Don't wait until they get there and then try to collect it all at once. So you can see here, this is where Paul kind of establishes that churches are going to take an offering, right? This is where, if you've ever wondered, like, why do churches take an offering? It's this right here. You see this pattern play out. Jesus collected, and now Paul's like, this is how we're going to do it. It's going to be a weekly thing. We're going to set it up to be regular. And I don't know if you've noticed, we actually don't pass a plate here. We have little boxes in the back that you can give. Part of the reason we don't take an offering anymore is because nobody carries cash. Most Gen Z doesn't know what a check is, so we don't do that anymore. Most of our giving is online. We also didn't want to be in people's face about it. The reason we stopped doing that is because we didn't like the feel. You know, if this is your first time, like immediately having a bucket put in front of you and like, am I supposed to put something in? And then that weird guilt that you have when you pass it and you didn't put anything in. My mom used to joke all the time. She wanted a shirt that says I give online so that people wouldn't judge her for passing the plate. We just eliminated that. We just don't want you to feel that way at all anymore. But the idea, the principle of, hey, we're gonna regularly collect an offering. And so there's some principles that we can learn from this. So the first one I want you to see in here that Paul assumes as he's writing this is that your giving should be purposeful. Notice he said you should each put aside a portion. You're putting it aside. You planned it out ahead of time. It was a part of the budget. The budget conversation, giving, generosity was a part of that conversation. He's assuming that they're not giving sporadically or emotionally. He's saying, no, it's going to be a regular part of what you do. They thought it through, so it's purposeful. And then the second thing we see in these verses is that it's proportional. He's saying that they should give a portion of the money that they bring in. They're not given a set amount. They're deciding on really kind of a percentage. Like, hey, this percentage of what we bring in, we're going to give. So if your income goes up and down, then your giving would kind of follow that because you're giving a percentage, not a set amount. So this is the first two things that we see as Paul's kind of assuming as he's writing this, that the people in the churches are going to give purposely and they're going to give proportionally. So the way this would look is you're going to sit down, and if you have a spouse, you're going to have a conversation with your spouse. If it's just you're going to think through this and you're going to pray through this. You're going to plan it out. You're going to have this in your budget, and it's going to be a part of the way you plan things out. That's what Paul is assuming here, purposeful and proportional. Now, if we jump over to 2 Corinthians, we see a couple of other principles. Paul's still talking about money in chapter 8, starting in verse 1. Now, I want you to know, dear brothers and sisters, what God in his kindness has done through the churches in Macedonia. So now he's talking about a different church. He had talked about Galatia. He's writing to the church in Corinth. Now he's talking about Macedonia, trying to set it up all the same way. And here's what he says about them. They are being tested by many troubles, and they are very poor. But they are also filled with abundant joy, which has overflowed in rich generosity. Verse 2 is wild, isn't it? I mean, they're tested by many troubles. Life is hard. They're very poor. He doesn't say poor. He says very poor. They are poor, like poor. And by the way, keep in mind, that's not North America 2025 poor. If you lived in first century Middle East, when they called you poor, that was rough. It was like, don't know where the next meal's coming from, might have to sell the clothes off my back to make it, like that is really, really poor, bad, destitute. That's who he's talking about here. And he says, even in that though, they overflowed in rich generosity. Whew. So the third principle I want you to see is that their giving was selfless. And by the way, I'm not saying reckless, I'm not saying foolish, but it was selfless. They didn't allow their own needs to get in the way of their generosity. For me, this is one of the most convicting verses in the Bible. You read this and go, oh my gosh. They were first century Middle East poor. And he's saying, but even in that, they were attempting to be generous. And that's what I'm saying, the principle of, hey, this needs to be a selfless thing. The focus isn't me, the focus is on what God's gonna do with it. Now, you might think verse 2 maybe is an anomaly, really? Like maybe he's like misspeaking or overstating his case. Look at verse 3, here's what Paul says. For I can testify, saw it, that they gave not only what they could afford, but far more. And they did it of their own free will. He's like, I didn't do it. I didn't twist their arm, they just did it. And he's like clarifying. He's like, hey, in case you thought verse 2, like I misspoke, like no, like for real, I saw it. They gave more than they could afford. So here's the fourth principle. Your giving should be sacrificial. Sacrificial. Now, you might be like, hold on, more than you can afford? What do you even mean? Like that sounds irresponsible or wrong. Let me say it this way. They adjusted their budget to make generosity happen. They said no to other things in order to say yes to generosity. Basically, it wasn't an add-on, right? It wasn't an afterthought. It wasn't we paid everything, we bought everything, we ate everything, we did everything. Do we have anything left over to? No, that's not the way they did it. He's saying, no, they moved some stuff around. They said no to some things in order to say yes to generosity, and they said not yet to some things in order to say yes to generosity. They didn't fill up their budget and then decide. It was like, no, it's a piece of that. And now if we have to say no to some other things, then we will. It was sacrificial. And then if you thought verse 2 and verse 3 are wild, look at verse 4. It's the craziest one. They begged us again and again for the privilege of sharing in the gift for the believers in Jerusalem. They begged Paul to give. You know how some like people who struggle with, and maybe it's you, like you struggle with like some of the verses in the Bible, like did Jonah really survive in the whale for 3 days? Like that's like an unbelievable thing. Like I don't know if I have enough faith for that. This is my verse. As a pastor, I'm like, wait a minute, they begged you to give? What is that? Like all right, whatever, you guys. It's a miracle. But this shows us our last principle, that our giving is supposed to be stubborn. There's a passionate determination to give. You're not going to let stuff knock you off of that path. You want to be a part of what God is doing. You're not going to let anything get in the way. And let's just be real. Can we be real? That's not kind of the opposite of what we're tempted to do when we talk about giving. We're kind of like, if anything comes up, it knocks us off, right? Giving is the last thing to be added, and it is the first thing to go. That's kind of the way we do it. But here he's saying, no. It's supposed to be stubborn. They weren't going to be talked out of it. They were just, I was going to say hell-bent, heaven-bent on giving. So here's the list. This is supposed to describe your giving. It's supposed to be purposeful. You're supposed to plan it out. It's supposed to be proportional. It's supposed to be a percentage. It's supposed to be selfless. It's supposed to be sacrificial. And it's supposed to be stubborn. So I want you to look at that. And I want you to do a self-evaluation. I don't know what your giving looks like, but you have to ask the question, do those words describe the way I give? Now, there's probably some type A who's like, okay, cool, those are nice principles, but like, can you just tell me what I'm supposed to do, right? Just tell me what I'm supposed to give. And I actually had this, somebody asked me this a couple months ago, just tell me what I'm supposed to do. All right. I'll try. If you locked yourself in a room with the Bible and you just read the verses that were about money, okay? If you just locked it, and there's a lot. Like I said, almost every book of the Bible has something about money in it. Now, keep in mind, back then, money was like, how many sheep do you have? So you might not see, you might be like, that's not money, it was then. So there's lots of stuff about possessions and how this works. And if you just wrote down every single verse that you saw that had something to do with money, and then you threw it into ChatGPT, and you said, ChatGPT, based off these verses, what should I do? One of the things that I didn't do this. I'm telling you what the robot would do. What it would say back to you is, one of the things would be this word, a tithe. And if you grew up in church, you probably heard this word thrown around a lot. Now, we almost, like usage-wise, we almost use that word to substitute if you're a church person. If you're not a church person, you're like, I've never heard that word before in my entire life. That's a weird word. It is a weird word. We almost use it interchangeably with just giving. Like, oh, I tithe, like I gave. Like it's a word for giving. But the word actually has a meaning. The word tithe means tenth, 10%. And you'd see this, if you were writing down all the verses, you'd see this kind of come up a lot. Abraham gave 10% to a priest named Melchizedek. Jacob gave 10%, and it was crazy. He gave 10%, and it was like with this promise, like, hey, God, if you get me out of this mess I'm in, I'll give 10%, which almost never works, but for Jacob it did. I don't know why. And then you would, the big place you'd see 10% is built into the way the Israelites did things. They gave 10% to the temple and to the priest to do the work of God. That's probably the big one that we all remember. And then Jesus even talked about a tithe during his ministry. So you'd see this kind of mentioned all throughout the Bible. Now here's the thing. This is the way I read it. I don't think that if you give less than 10%, you're sinning. I grew up in some churches that did. I grew up in some churches, I don't know about you, grew up in some churches like if you give 9.9%, you are stealing from God and that is a sin. Like I grew up in that, so I get that if you're like, and by the way, if you think that, go ahead, that's fine for me. You can keep that. But I don't know that that's true. And part of the reason I think about the way Jesus talked about, like, so Jesus stood by the offering thing at the temple and an old lady comes in and puts 2 coins in and Jesus is like, she's awesome. Remember that? But then the rich young ruler comes up to him and goes, hey, what should I do? And Jesus is like, you got to give everything away. And like, you see the way Jesus responded to these 2 people on complete opposite ends of the spectrum of wealth, and he treated them completely differently. So I guess it would be really nice for me able to say, we're all supposed to do this, but I don't know. Because I think Jesus is setting it up to where it's actually about your heart. It's about your heart. And it's gonna be that everybody's heart's a little different. And maybe he's gonna be a little bit like, hey, for some of us, he's gonna be like, yeah, you need to give more because this is a bigger deal to you. And for some of us, giving any amount is going to be something that's pleasing. And I want you to know, like, I know people who give more than 10%, and I think Jesus loves that. And I know some single moms who give like 1%, and I think Jesus loves that. So I wish I could just give you a flat answer. And I guess if you really wanted direction, I would say, hey, 10% is in there all over the place. If you're just asking what God's heart is on this, I would say 10%, there's something to that. Maybe that should be a goal. Maybe that should be something that you consider. But I don't think it's a flat, this is what you have to do. Now, I will tell you a crazy story here. Can you want to hear a crazy story about Gen Z? You know them 20-year-olds. I think it's 20 to 30-ish is what a Gen Z is now. I had a 26-year-old in my office a couple weeks ago, 26. And he was struggling with some stuff, purpose stuff. He expressing, want to follow Jesus in my life, but he was struggling with some things. And like he started, I was asking this question a lot a couple weeks ago. I was on this kick. I was like, hey, do you believe your best days are behind you or ahead of you? And I was having this conversation with a lot of different people. And he's 26. And he was like, I don't know. And I was like, you're 26 and you don't know the answer to that question? You think you peaked? All right, what, in high school? Like, when was that? Like, and he was struggling with that. Like, genuinely wasn't sure. My best days might be behind me. And I was just trying to speak life to him. I was trying to encourage him. I was trying to say, man, come on now. God's got plans for you. Like, and I was trying to speak life. And I just want you to know, like, Gen Z struggles with that. That's a big deal. 20-year-olds cannot answer that question quickly. Are my best days behind me? Like, they can't answer it quickly. And that's crazy to me. So I had all kinds of compassion for him. I was trying to like pump him up, like, hey man, you're doing this well. And he out of nowhere goes, well, one of the things I really want to work on is I want to tithe off of my gross instead of my net. And I was like, what? He goes, I want to tithe like pre-tax, not post-tax. And I'm like, I know what net and gross is, my guy. I was just surprised to hear you say that. And I just sat there and I was like, dude, what an amazing thing at 26 years old to say, I am so into this, that I'm so sold out for what God is doing that I am trying to increase my generosity to that level. And I was like inspired by that. And I was honest with him and said, hey man, my generation, I'm a millennial, and the Xers and the boomers, a lot of them don't have down what you have down already at 26. And like that should be a little convicting to those of us who are like in our peak earning years. We look at him and he's like, no, I'm getting after it. And I just want you to know that part of the reason I tell you that story is I kind of consistently feel in my life Jesus pulling me and inviting me into a deeper generosity. I always hear stories like that. I'm like, ooh. And I know it's to grow my faith and allow him to be more of my provider and to release those things and to see his kingdom built. And I want to listen to those invitations. All right, can I address the elephant in the room? I'm a pastor talking to you about money. If this is your first time here, welcome. This is awesome. Can't wait for that story to be told. So a couple years ago, a TV preacher was raising money to buy his second jet, not his first one. And evidently that one wasn't good enough. He wanted to buy his second one. And maybe you heard that story. And then you also hear stories of preachers who wear like $5,000 outfits on stage and live in monster mansions and have like $200 haircuts. I did this myself. And you hear those stories, and maybe those stories have shaken your trust in the church when it comes to money. And maybe those stories have created some gross feelings when you hear a sermon like this, or when a church talks about money, you're like, ugh. And what you're experiencing is flavored by those stories. And the way you think about money in church is flavored by those stories. And I just want to say, I get it. I hate those stories. I hate those stories. I want to fight them. I want to actually go find them because they're taking something that is sacred and they're taking the generosity of the people who are trying to follow Jesus and they're using it to get rich themselves. And I think it's despicable and disgusting. And I hate it. But what I want you to hear is that for every spectacular, horrible story about churches and money, for every horrible preacher who's getting rich off of the backs of his followers, there are thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of churches and pastors who are faithfully following Jesus, building his kingdom, serving their community, and taking care of God's money in a way that honors God and does not enrich themselves. There are hundreds and hundreds and thousands of them doing it right. You only hear about the stupid ones. Right? That's the way the news works, right? You only hear about the spectacular, crazy stories. And what that does is it warps your perception of the church because you only hear stories about the crazy ones. But I promise there are plenty of faithful and boring churches that are doing what God has called them to do. And the stories would be on repeat, but the news doesn't acknowledge those. So you're only hearing the crazy ones. And I just hope that you can see that that's warped our perception a little bit and that actually isn't normal and that most churches are really trying to get after it and do what God has called them to do and handle money the way God wants us to. And I would hope that you would see that Mosaic is one of those places. If you call Mosaic home, I hope that you trust that we're good managers of the money that God has given us. Our heart here is to bend our budget toward being a church for people who don't think church is for them. That's the thing, that's the mission, that's the cause. And we're hoping that everything we do can kind of bend towards that. And what I hope you can look and see is that, I hope you can just see that that's true. That you wouldn't even have to dig into the books to see that, hey, that's obviously what's happening here. I hope you can just eyeball it and be like, yep, that's what they're after. And I want to remind you, like, man, God has been moving. And this is the part I want to look back as a church, and I'm sorry for being repetitive, but I just want to remind you, like, since we moved into this building, we've baptized 90 people. We've grown by 200%. Kids ministry is exploding. Like I said, 17 babies in the nursery last week. They were crawling through walls. It was crazy. Youth ministry's growing like crazy. They had a riot the other night. There's so many kids here. On Thursdays, they have the high school youth group on Thursdays, and they come in for worship. And I always, like, when I come in here on Thursday, I'm like, man, there's a lot of people here. And then, like, the high schoolers leave, and I'm like, oh, never mind. There's actually not very many people. It's a little disappointing sometimes. But it's because there's so many of them. And Gen Z is here. We have 20-year-olds in this church, and they're not sitting on the bench. They are, like, in the game. And I want you to see that that's not normal. Most churches aren't experiencing any of that. There's a crying baby in the room right now, and I love you, child. That is good. Don't you dare take him out. This is great. This shows us. You know, there's some churches that would love to have crying children because that means there's life there. And we have it. We have it. God is moving here. It's not normal. And what we're doing right now in this series is we're looking back and we're seeing the way God has moved, and we're taking that, then we're looking forward and we're seeing the opportunity that we have. And I want to remind you of the three things that we're looking at here as we look forward, where we want to specifically train future leaders, we want to invest in the next generation, we want to prepare for multiplication. Training future leaders, we want to invest in an internship program to get some kids who want to be called into ministry, get them into school, train them as interns here, and at the end of those 4 years, come out debt-free and get into ministry. We want to do that over and over and over again. With the next gen, we want to send some high schoolers and middle schoolers to camp, and we want to get another staff member in kids ministry to help with the babies that are crawling up the wall. And then with multiplication, listen, we want to prepare for it because we know you guys have eyeballs. You can see how many empty seats are in this room. And we have a duty. If we really want to be a church for people who don't think church for them, we have to make sure there's always empty seats for somebody to come in. Because the moment there's not empty seats is the moment that we stop being that. Even if we say we're that, we're not that anymore, right? Because the whole idea is to be able to bring people in. And if we can't bring anybody else in, we're not doing it anymore. We're just doing this for us. And we're not going to do that. So we need to prepare for whatever that means. So, and by the way, we also have to continue doing what we are doing, right? Those are the new and exciting things, but we have to keep doing what we are doing, right? I keep telling you this building is a miracle. It is a miracle, but it still has a mortgage. We have 10 people on staff. We have to pay for goldfish crackers for the 50 toddlers, right? Like we have to keep doing what we're doing, okay? So here's how this works at Mosaic. We do not have, we don't have a sugar daddy here at Mosaic. Did you know that? We don't. We don't have a hedge fund manager here, as far as I know. We don't have a real estate mogul or a casino kingpin. If we do, please let me know. And if you know one also, please let me know. But as of right now, we don't got that. When we're called to something at this church, when we're called to something, we all have to get our shoulder underneath it. That's the way God's called us to work. And I think that's a good thing. I actually prefer this over having one or two carry the whole load. I think this is good that God has called all of us to be a part of that. So here's what I'm asking. Today on your way out, you're going to get a card. It's a commitment card. And again, if you're newer here, if it's your first time here, I love that you're here. This is so cool. Love that you're here. Hope that you don't hate me. You can take the card, but I don't want you to, if you're just curious, you can kind of look and see what we're doing, but you don't need to feel any kind of obligation to that. But if this is your home, if Mosaic is your place, if this is your family, take that. I want you to pray about that. That's what I want you to do. I want you to take that card home. I want you to look at it. I want you to, if you have a spouse, pray with them about it. Talk to God about it. For real, pray and then decide. Pray and then decide. You don't decide, then pray. You pray and then you decide. I also shot a video. We have a QR code that you can see. That we sent it to a lot of people. If you're on our email list or text list, we sent you a video this week. But I know by analytics that only 21 of you watched it. Thank you for the 21 of you that did. But please, it's a helpful thing to kind of encapsulate all of what we're trying to do here. And that also takes you to a page that kind of explains all of this again. But our goal here is for 300 households to participate in this. That's the goal. I don't want to put a money goal. I want to put a participation goal, because what we really want is for all of us to be a part of this. Because again, I mean, it's more about your heart. I want you to be in here. I want you to be a part of this, to give purposely, proportionally, selflessly, sacrificially, and stubbornly towards what God is doing here. And if you don't give, or maybe you give kind of sporadically, this is the perfect time to jump in to being a regular giver here. It's the perfect time. Now, here's the purpose of the card. I want to talk fast because I know I don't have a ton of time. I mentioned the card to some people like, ew, what are you doing? You look over my shoulder? You're going to call me if I don't do it? I'm like, no, I don't know what anybody gives, actually, so I wouldn't be calling anybody. The reason we're asking for the card is because when you tell us what you're committing to and we get all those together, then we're going to actually be able to sit down and plan for what we're going to do. So it's actually what you're giving us is the gift to be able to plan and to start the gears turning towards the thing that we think God has called us to. If we don't have any idea, we're just going to have to shoot in the dark. We don't want to do that. So you're giving us the ability to plan as we move forward. So that's the purpose of the card. And again, I would ask that you would actually pray that through and think about that. And one last little thing, just so you know, we've had some questions about people who are asking some specifics. Well, how much does it cost to send a kid to camp? And how much does it cost for an intern and all that? And I love those questions, and we will absolutely answer those questions. But here's what we're actually not going to be doing like a designation thing where you actually designate your money to going to certain things. We're not doing that. It's a nightmare on the back end for us. But we're going to do those things. That's what I want you to see. So if you feel, I want you to give through the card. So you give through the card, you do that, and we will get after that, okay? And if it's a trust thing, you can come have a conversation with us, but we're just asking that you don't designate at this time because it is a nightmare. All right, so listen. I didn't sign up to be a pastor to raise money. It's not what I signed up for. My passion is to see people in that baptismal right there. That's it. That's peak for me. Seeing somebody declare to the world that Jesus is it. Like, that's it. When I see people come out of that water, this is the peak of the peak of the peak of the thing that I do. And I just want to see that on repeat, on repeat, on repeat. When somebody gives their life to Jesus, when somebody surrenders to Jesus, I even want to hear stories of people like, hey, I made a decision to do this with my life because of what God's doing at Mosaic. Like, it blows me away. I love it. I love it. I love it. That's what I'm called to. I want to see people who don't think church is for them come in here and hear about Jesus in a way that makes sense to them and have God move in their hearts. That's what I want to do over and over and over again until you put me in the ground. But for us to take these couple of next steps, and that's what I want you to imagine. Imagine a staircase here, and God has brought us all these steps. And then I'm talking about some of these steps that are up here, but the very next step that we have to take a step on is a financial step for us as a church. We can't go there if we don't take this one together. And what I want you to hear is, I need you. Need you. No, not Jesus. I can't make fish appear, or coins appear in fish's mouth. I can't turn water into wine. If we're going to do this, it's going to take all of us. And what I want your mindset to be is you don't give, how about this? You don't give to Mosaic, you give through Mosaic. You give through Mosaic to see these things happen. You give through Mosaic to see people come to faith in Jesus, to see people baptized, to see that next generation trained up, raised up, and empowered to get after it. You're giving through it, not to it. So here's what I want to do next weekend. Next weekend, I want it to be commitment weekend. I want you to bring that card back, and or a digital one if you don't want to do the physical one. And I want to do it together. Can we make it a thing next week? Let's make it a thing. Let's bring this together, and let's together say, all right, God, here it is. Here's what we're going to do. And let's offer it to him and then just watch him work. Can we do that? Can we make it a thing and do this together next week? And say, hey, we want to see a move. Here's our step of faith in that. Let's do that. And you know this, that's the reason. I hope you know this. And maybe, let me throw this out. If you're sitting here and this is like, you're here and maybe you're not a Christian and this is a sermon on money, but God has been moving in your heart up to this day, and maybe today's the day you want to surrender your life to Jesus. I will tell you, how cool of a story would it be for you? Be like, when did you get saved? Well, it was a money sermon. Be a crazy story. But if God's been moving in your heart and you want to make that decision to follow Jesus, make it today. Make it today. That's what this church is about. That's what this church is about. And that's what we want to see on repeat over and over and over again. All right, pray with me before the babies take over the nursery. Lord, thank you so much for what you're doing here. Thank you for the way you've moved these past 3 years. We are grateful, and we are a little blown away. What a God we serve. Thank you for letting us be a part of it. Lord, I pray for us right now. I pray for the person in here who maybe they're a follower of you and they've surrendered their life to you, but this part is really hard for them. Lord, I pray that you would be with them in that, be with their heart. As all the barriers start to come up and all the thoughts start to come up and all the pushback starts to come up, Lord, I pray that you would speak through that. Help us to remember it's a heart thing. Lord, I pray for this church. I want one of the things to describe this church to be the word generous. I don't know that we're there yet, Lord, but I want that to be the case because I know you work in that. And if this is the way you set it up to work, Lord, we want to lean into that. So I pray that we would be that. and that you would move in that way. We offer that to you, Lord. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.